while teaching 10-year-olds the, quote, pleasures of sex. The folks at the International Planned Parenthood Federation apparently think that is a great idea. That group making the recommendation that's what we should teach our 10-year-olds in a new report titled Stand and Deliver. And by the way, they want that teaching to be mandatory. It is a suggestion that has critics calling Planned Parenthood a bunch of, quote, sex-obsessed adults. But is that fair? Joining me now, Fox News contributor and radio talk show host Monica Crowley. All right, Monica. This Planned Parenthood domestic won't comment on that because they say it's from our international branch and they're closed. We can't reach them right now. But they want this mandatory that we have not just sex ed for 10-year-olds, sex ed, but to teach them, quote, the pleasures of sex.
Right. There are plenty of times, and there's plenty of time in somebody's life to learn the pleasures of sex. A 10-year-old should not be taught that. And here we've got an international organization that clearly wants to dictate to the domestic Planned Parenthood organization to set these guidelines for public schools and organizations. They essentially want the government to put this in place to force the role of sex education onto schools and teachers and the rest, supplanting the parents. This is the parent's role, Megan. This is not the role of anybody else except a parent. If a parent deems that their 10-year-old is growing and starting puberty early and maturing early, then it should be the parent's responsibility and the parent's right to say, gee, maybe my child needs a little bit more education here in terms of the birds and the bees, which now seems like a very quaint notion, right?
Yes.
Birds and the bees. But to hand it off to bureaucrats, whether it's international or domestic bureaucrats or even your kid's teacher, is ludicrous to me. It is an absolute, I think, a total grabbing of control over what should remain in parents' hands.
You know, I asked our brain room to do some research on what 10-year-olds are learning right now in school, and you might be interested to know. This is what the average 10-year-old is learning in a 5th grade. Addition and subtraction of fractions, using dictionaries, reading aloud.
Yes.
The pleasures of sex.
Yeah, no.
That's what they want to add to the list?
What's wrong with that list? The last one.
Well, let me take the other side, because it's obviously, I mean, I called it ridiculous in the tease, which is clearly editorializing. But I mean, can't we agree on anything that 10-year-olds should not be taught the pleasures of sex in class? All right, but let me take the other side. People say teen pregnancy is now trickling down. There was a story last week of an 11-year-old who gave birth, and the argument is people like that, kids like that, need to be taught because their parents aren't teaching them about contraceptives and so on.
Again, individual responsibility. Parents, parental role models, even I would say religious leaders, if they make a moral judgment. I mean, I think the problem here is that you've got an organization, Planned Parenthood, that is very aggressive on sex education, very aggressive on pro-choice and pushing the abortion option onto people of all ages, frankly. You have them coming at this with a political agenda. And my fear is that it is actually removing the role of parents, and if parents aren't present, other kinds of moral leaders, religious leaders, Megan, that can actually put sex into a greater context for kids.
They don't want that.
Right?
This is the issue Planned Parenthood has. They say, in the study, they say fundamentalists and other religious groups, including the Catholic Church and others, have imposed tremendous barriers to young people obtaining information related to sex. And they say currently many religious teachings deny the pleasurable and positive aspects of sex. They want the church out of the business of sex education.
That's exactly the statement that I zoned in on when I read this piece, Megan, because they set aside for particular criticism the Catholic Church, they set aside Islam, the Muslim religion, and some others saying, oh, well, they're blocking our kids from understanding the pleasures of sex, not the dangers, not unwanted pregnancy, the pleasures of sex. That's what this emphasis is, and that's why it's so outrageous.
You can't even drive a car until you're 16 years old.
It's so unbelievable, Megan, but this is, again, this is a very secular, progressive agenda. And I think parents in this country, around the world, should stand up and say, this is our responsibility, because what we want to do for our 10-year-olds, our 12-year-olds, our 16-year-olds, our 18-year-olds, for God's sakes, is to give them some context for sex, whether it's religious, moral, values, religious, you name it. Yeah. But that is not present in this agenda.
You know, we're going to stay on this. We're going to continue pushing the domestic Planned Parenthood for a statement on this. I mean, I think some people may think, all right, it's international, it's The Netherlands Minister for Development Corporation, this guy Bert Koenders, who is backing this. So let's find out how the domestic Planned Parenthood feels about this and whether they are as far out as this group is. Monica Crowley, always a pleasure, lady.
Nice to see you.
Thanks so much for being
Megan.
here. Well, you can check out Planned Parenthood's report for yourself by heading to our website. You can log on to foxnews.com, and the link is under the latest news tab, and we'll put a link on our show page for that as well.